America laughed at him every Sunday night. They laughed at his failures. They laughed at his bitterness. They laughed at the way he sat on that worn-out couch, hand buried deep in his pants, staring at a television like it was the only thing in the world that hadn't betrayed him. But what most people never realized was how much of that laughter came from something real. Because behind the jokes, behind the insults, and behind one of television's most outrageous families, there was a truth that even the fans never fully understood. And for years, the man at the center of it all stayed quiet. Until now. When Married with Children first appeared on television in April of 1987, it didn't look like a success story. It looked like a mistake. Critics didn't just dislike it, they dismissed it. Some called it crude. Others called it tasteless. A few wondered how something like this had even made it on air. Television at the time was filled with polished families. Parents who loved each other. Children who learned lessons. Homes that felt safe and warm. But this show was different from the first second it began. This family didn't love each other the way television families were supposed to. They insulted each other. They disappointed each other. They survived each other. And at the center of it all was Al Bundy, played by Ed O'Neill. Al Bundy wasn't a hero. He was a man who had peaked at 17 years old. A man whose greatest accomplishment was scoring 4 touchdowns in a single high school football game, a moment he would relive in his mind for the rest of his life because everything after it had been downhill. He sold women's shoes for a living. He had no money, no respect, no future. And yet, week after week, millions of people couldn't stop watching him. Because somehow in all his misery, Al Bundy felt real. What audiences didn't know was just how close that feeling was to reality, not just for the character but for the man playing him. When Ed O'Neill first received the script, his agents warned him not to touch it. They told him it was a terrible show. They told him it was airing on a new network that might not even survive. They told him it could damage his career before it even began. That network was Fox Broadcasting Company. At the time, Fox was an outsider. It wasn't respected. It wasn't established. It was trying to break into an industry controlled by giants. And Married with Children wasn't just another show. It was a gamble. A risk. A rebellion against everything television was supposed to be. But when Ed read the script, something about it spoke to him. It wasn't safe. It wasn't clean. It wasn't respectable. It was honest. And that honesty would change his life forever. From the outside, the Bundy family looked like chaos. Peggy Bundy, played by Katie Sagal, was lazy, selfish, and proud of it. She didn't cook. She didn't clean. She spent money they didn't have and mocked her husband constantly. Their daughter Kelly, played by Christina Applegate, was beautiful but underestimated, drifting through life in a haze of confusion and attention. Their son Bud was desperate for love and respect but rarely found either. They weren't role models. They were survivors. And that's what made people connect with them. Because underneath the insults and the absurdity, there was something painfully human about the Bundys. They were stuck. Stuck in jobs they hated. Stuck in lives that hadn't turned out the way they'd imagined. Stuck carrying the quiet disappointment that comes from realizing your dreams might never happen. And somehow people saw themselves in that. But they would never admit it. Years later, Ed would reveal something that stayed with him throughout the entire run of the show. People would approach him on the street, smiling, excited, grateful. They would tell him how much they loved Al Bundy. But they never said he reminded them of themselves. Instead, they always said the same thing. You remind me of my brother. My uncle. My friend. My father. Never me. Never once, he said, did anyone ever look at him and admit, you remind me of me. Because Al Bundy was too honest. Too exposed. Too close to something people didn't want to confront. The show ran for 11 seasons. 259 episodes. Nearly a decade of laughter that masked something deeper. But behind the scenes, the reality wasn't always funny. The set was filled with sharp personalities. Strong egos. Unspoken tensions. The cast had chemistry, but chemistry didn't always mean harmony. Ed would later admit that one of his biggest regrets involved his relationship with Amanda Bearse, who played Marcy, the Bundys' neighbor and one of AL's fiercest enemies. Their characters clashed constantly, trading insults that became legendary among fans. But off-camera, the tension became real. It started with something that seemed small at the time. A magazine cover. A moment that should have been a celebration. Some cast members were included. Others were not. Amanda had hoped Ed would stand up for her. Fight for her inclusion. He didn't. At the time, he believed he was being practical. He believed pushing back might cost them everything. But what he didn't realize was how deeply that decision would hurt her. The distance between them grew. Years passed. Words were said. Silences grew longer. And what had once been a professional relationship became something fractured. It was one of many reminders that success didn't protect people from pain. Sometimes it made it worse. For Christina Applegate, the experience of becoming Kelly Bundy came at a cost no one could see. She was only 17 years old when the show began. Still figuring out who she was. Still vulnerable. Still growing into herself. But almost overnight she became something else. She became a symbol. She became an object of attention. She became someone the world felt entitled to judge. She later revealed that the pressure led her into a dark and private struggle. An eating disorder that consumed her thoughts. A constant fear of being seen as anything less than perfect. She hid it from everyone. She hid while she ate. She hid while she suffered. She hid while millions of people laughed at the character that had made her famous. The world saw confidence. But inside she was fighting a battle no one knew existed. And she wasn't alone. Katie Sagal would later describe the environment on set as harsh, sarcastic, unforgiving. A place where vulnerability wasn't protected. It was exposed. There were moments when cast members overheard themselves being criticized. Moments when trust disappeared. Moments when the illusion of family faded. But they kept going. Because that's what professionals do. They show up. They perform. They smile. Even when it hurts. And then there was the strange contradiction at the heart of the show's success. Millions of viewers loved it. But Hollywood didn't respect it. Ed would later admit that despite the ratings, despite the longevity, despite the cultural impact, the show never earned the recognition other sitcoms received. It wasn't celebrated. It wasn't honored. It wasn't taken seriously. It was laughed at. Just like Al Bundy. And then one day it ended. Not with a celebration. Not with closure. But with silence. It wasn't in a studio. He wasn't in a meeting. He wasn't surrounded by executives or producers. He was in Ohio. Back home. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere familiar. He saw a newly married couple arriving at a nearby bed and breakfast. They recognized him immediately. They smiled. They congratulated him. And then they said something that stopped him cold. "We're sorry about your show." He didn't understand. "What do you mean?" They looked at him with confusion. "You don't know?" That's how he found out. Not from the network. Not from the studio. From strangers. After 11 years, strangers. There was no phone call. No farewell. No thank you. Just an ending that arrived quietly without ceremony. Later he would joke about it. Joke about how other shows received gifts. Luxury cars. Grand finales. He received nothing. But beneath the humor was something real. A reminder that in Hollywood, success didn't always mean respect. And yet, something unexpected happened. The show didn't disappear. It lived on. In reruns. In memories. In the people who grew up watching it. Because Married with Children had done something most shows never achieve. It told the truth. Not the polished truth. Not the comforting truth. But the uncomfortable truth. The truth about disappointment. The truth about failure. The truth about holding on to the past because the future never came. Al Bundy wasn't a fantasy. He was a mirror. And that's why people loved him. Even if they would never admit it. Even if they would never say it out loud. Years later, Ed would reflect on what the show meant to him. What it gave him. What it took from him. Fame came with recognition. But it also came with isolation. With expectations. With the strange experience of being known by millions but understood by very few. He became Al Bundy in the eyes of the world. Not Ed. Not himself. And that identity followed him everywhere. But over time, something shifted. People stopped laughing at Al Bundy. And started appreciating him. Because they realized what he represented. Not failure. But endurance. He kept going. He kept showing up. He kept surviving. Just like they did. That was the secret most fans never fully understood. The show wasn't about mocking a man who had lost. It was about recognizing a man who refused to disappear. And in that way, Al Bundy became something unexpected. Not a joke. But a symbol. A symbol of every person who had ever looked at their life and wondered how it turned out this way. A symbol of every dream that didn't happen. Every opportunity that slipped away. Every moment of quiet regret. But also, every moment of survival. Because survival isn't glamorous. It isn't celebrated. It isn't respected. But it's real. And sometimes, reality is the most powerful story of all. That's what Ed O'Neill understood. That's what he carried with him long after the camera stopped rolling. And that's why, decades later, people still remember Al Bundy. Not because he was perfect, but because he was human.